Wake up! It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 168. MASA, Make America Sleep Again. Wake me up when September ends. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host. If you're new to the Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We are glad you are here. I anticipate that there will be a lot of individuals wanting to get in touch with the show this week, which is awesome. If you want to do that, you can do it through my social media, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter X, Dr. Chris Winter Blue Sky Threads. We have a YouTube page where we post all the video content of the show. You can always drop a comment under the video that you're watching. We have a Spotify music playlist group that you can find if you take a look at our podcast webpage. That is sleepunplugged.com, has all kinds of information on there, including the top 10 threats to your sleep, which we'll update at the end of this month. Been a busy week. It's starting off a very, very busy September for me. I sometimes get into this thing of having very busy trips or very busy periods of time. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I can't wait until Thursday night when I'm home from this trip. You're sort of looking past the next couple days or next 24, 48 hours. I'm looking towards the end of September because my September is so dense with travel and obligations. I don't know how I'm going to make it through it. It's just one of those things where yes to one more thing, yes to one more thing, and all of a sudden you are a stranger to your wife and dogs. But anyway, it's good to be wanted. So, Wake Me Up When September Ends is part of the meaning of the lyric we picked for this week's podcast, and we'll get into that in just a minute. I did start this September off with a lovely trip up to Philadelphia to speak to the wonderful sleep department at Temple University. All their sleep fellows were there. Man, there were a bunch of them, and they were bright and smart and asked great questions. And we had a good time talking about hypersomnia and sleep in general. I really appreciate the invitation to come up and talk to you guys and wish you all the best. Comments, corrections, criticisms, very important to the show. We like to give people a voice, and I think that's really important and very germane to the topic we're talking about today because a lot of people have opinions about things. And we always want to be as scientifically rigorous as my brain will allow us to be. So if there's ever a fact or a piece of information that is put out by this podcast that you think might be an error, we want to hear from you. Switching gears a little bit, this was from a listener, Nazareth, who wrote, I've been suffering for 35 years, ongoing, not knowing what was wrong. Docs just wrote off the exhaustion as chronic fatigue without giving an actual diagnosis. I lost the prime years of my life. Now I'm old, not much hope of having a good rest of my life. I went from being a very active person, almost hyperactive, to practically bedridden, sleeping upwards of 16 hours per day, with the average hours exhausted and wishing to sleep. Now, we talked about this was a listener who is writing back about our episode 147 on idiopathic hypersomnia. And I think that appreciate you sharing that with us, Nazareth. I chose that comment for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I think it really illustrates that doctors have lots of limitations. Western medicine has a tremendous amount of limitation. And I've never had a lot of trouble talking to my patients about that. I have ideas of things we can try, but at the end of the day, what I can do for you is very limited. And that can be frustrating. And I think sometimes we as doctors handle that poorly. We don't like to say we don't know. We don't like to say we can't help. And the way we phrase that, the energy we have when we're talking to our patients can seem like we're giving up or we don't care or we're not, we can't be bothered. So I think that's interesting that he feels like docs have written him off, in terms of his sleepiness. And I really hear the frustration from this individual that was very healthy and suddenly was not with what appears to be a very chronic illness. And we're talking a lot about chronic illnesses these days. In fact, that's part of the reason why we're talking today. So I hear you, Nazareth, and I hope the episode that you were listening to is helpful to you. I also hope that this episode is helpful to you to understand that, we really try our best, and I hope that you found some benefit in the podcast that you were listening to. Before we get going, the song lyric, obviously, Green Day, Wake Me Up When September Ends, was the song Wake Me Up When September Ends off of their album American Idiot, which was actually their seventh album. I think most people, if you weren't living in California, probably became aware of Green Day in a big way in 1994 when they released Dookie, which was actually their third album. 39 Smooth and Kerplunk were the first two albums. And for a lot of you guys, I'm sure you all probably bought those albums after you got Dookie and were maybe a little bit disappointed in the quality and what was on there. I mean, Dookie was a smash hit. Everybody was listening to it when I was in college. That led right to their next album, Insomniac, which was their fourth album. And we're going to put Wake Me Up When September Ends on the Spotify Music Playlist Volume 4, but we're also going to put a song off of the album Insomniac on there because, hey, it's Insomniac, right? And the song we'll pick is Brain Stew slash Jaded, two songs that kind of are really one song. The Brain Stew song we'll put on there because it was originally the working title of that song was Insomniac, but later switched it to Brain Stew. It was about their lead singer, Billy Joe, dealing with insomnia. Another song off of American Idiot that we should mention was Jesus of Suburbia, which sort of mirrors the David Bowie song of about a decade earlier, Buddhist of Suburbia, which was I think a short story or a play that he actually did the soundtrack for. And if you listen to Jesus of Suburbia, it definitely sounds like David Bowie's Moon Age Daydream when he first starts playing it. So I think we'll have to put on Brain Stew Jaded. We'll go ahead and put on Jesus of Suburbia off of American Idiot and Wake Me Up When September Ends. Green Day, amazing band, and happy to have them part of the Volume 4 Spotify Music playlist. So here we are with this podcast, and this all started because of a couple things. One was the amazing Jenna Lee, who does a news platform called Smarter News. That's SmartHernews. She was with Fox News. I knew her for many years. And I would come on and do, like something would happen related to sleep. She'd say, Chris, you want to come on the show and be on Fox News and talk about it? I'm like, great. And so we would do that a lot. And she eventually left Fox News and did her own news thing. And she said, look, I want to make an incredibly nonpartisan news source, which I have to say, if you give it a shot, is actually kind of refreshing. It really is nice to have a fact put out there and you make your own decisions about it. And I think she does a really good job. And no, she struggles a lot with things. I mean, at some point, if somebody's reporting the news as this was, I wrote her, if somebody reports that 7 times 5 is 28, do you have an obligation if 50% of Americans think it's 35 and the other 50% think it's 28? Do you have an obligation as a reporter to say, factually, it's 35? So the 50% of you that think it's 28 are actually wrong. So I think she struggles with that. So anyway, this all stems from some of her coverage about this recent RFK hearing. I'm sure you saw the sound clips about it. And I try to stay out of these types of things. I like to see both points of view. And, as I listened to this, I was, upset by a lot of what was being said and a lot of the interpretation of it. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, but making people healthier is a positive. I was on a podcast of a woman who I know was quite supportive of RFK in this position, and she does an amazing podcast called 10,000 Hours Outside. I've been on it a couple times, and she's like, "Look, we need to get food dyes out of our kids' foods. We need to encourage a lot more activity and being away from cell phone. I mean, everything she wants to do is I'm fully behind." So I think that this kind of got me thinking about the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, and sort of the large tent that that encloses and how it directly affects me and other people in the medical and scientific community. So I'll start this podcast off with just a few polls that I pulled up that are reassuring in the sense that most Americans still believe in doctors. So 83% of adults trust their doctor or healthcare provider. 81% of adults, parents, trust their pediatrician. We can contrast that with 66% of people trust local public health departments. 59% of people trust the CDC. 57 the FDA. If we drop down to RFK Jr. himself, it's 41%, Donald Trump 37. So there is definitely a sort of layering of trust here. And when we think about doctors and healthcare providers, they're still really high. I think about it sort of like police and firefighters. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with both kinds of organizations over the years and do training with them. Growing up, we trusted the police and trusted the fire department, and there's been erosions of those trusts over the years, which can be problematic. When some bad actors do something and it creates an erosion of trust across the board, that can be problematic. So, digging deeper, vaccines, 59% of adults say they will definitely not or probably not get the next COVID vaccine. Many people feel a large amount of confusion when it comes to vaccines and what is being recommended. So, I kind of took this whole thing in. And in the process of that and responding to some other comments about these hearings and these topics at large, I thought this would be a great thing to do a podcast on and really open this up for some discussion if you want to have it, or at least some thoughts. And I think it's worth understanding that everybody who comes into a conversation like that brings a certain degree of bias. Um, I will tell you that I am from Southwest Virginia. I grew up in a very Republican household. As I moved through my life, tended to start leaning a bit more towards the left in general, but would be completely open and have in presidential, races, have voted on both sides of things. So I'm not somebody who does not look at issues and blindly only looks at a political party. In fact, I think we would probably be better off without this sort of two-party system if you want to know my one person's opinion about it. So I wanted to go through 10 little observations that I had and really from the bottom of my heart, welcome your feedback, constructive feedback. I mean, one guy said, "You're a sleep doctor," and then he wrote clown. So, I mean, you can write that if you want to, but I think it's a lot more fun if we engage and try to make each other smarter and more well-informed. And I think that's where community building begins. And I'm a big believer, in my bonding community, the people that I share certain things with. But I'm also a big believer in bridging communities, reaching out to groups that I don't get to talk to and communicate with. I think that's really important. So here are my 10 things. Number one, COVID was a trauma. It was definitely a trauma for me. I'm getting a phone call from a hospital saying, "We may need you as a sleep doctor neurologist to work some shifts in the emergency room because it's out of control." That was not made up. These were real people who were very sick, and many of them died to the point where some places had to get freezer trucks to put bodies in. So I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it in the hospital. And I was thankful every night that somebody at the hospital that was parent to me never called me and said, Chris, come on in and gown up. We need you. In fact, I'm not looking for sympathy as a doctor in this situation because our clinic, a neurology and sleep clinic, just essentially said, okay, we'll go virtual. And we did. And I've heard a lot of talk in those hearings that the only thing that Donald Trump did that was positive during forever was Operation Warp Speed, his ability to mobilize this. I would say, in addition, something else he did that I think often gets overlooked is that he was responsible for saying, insurance companies, guess what? As of right now, you will allow telehealth and you will pay doctors exactly what they would have charged had that person been in person. I mean, I listen, I think that was fantastic and still pays off today. He really opened up this era of telehealth, in my opinion. I mean, I've been relatively virtual since then. And it's really made the lives of my patients much easier. It's made communication with my patients much faster, much more reliable. I am much more in contact with these individuals. So to me, I think it was a game changer. But this was a trauma that I think we're all still dealing with. And I think sometimes with these kinds of PTSD types of situations, our brains resort to a couple things. One is anger and blame. The second is minimization. These are natural. It's natural that when we suffer a trauma over time, it dampens to some degree. Loss of a loved one, does it ever fully go away? No, I think it changes you fundamentally. You are now a different person. But I think for most people, the pain does generally get easier. Your brain has trouble thinking about things intensely for long periods of time. It's almost like a protective mechanism, you know? There are things that I thought, I would never get over. And here I am, I can't even remember what those things were. So I think that we need to be very careful when there starts to be narratives about something not really happening. It really distressed me when senators on, both sides of the aisle were saying, can we agree that about 1 million to 1.5 million people died because of COVID? Now, record keeping at that time was tough, really tough. But again, talk to any doctor. Don't take my word for it. Talk to a friend who worked in an emergency room. We know things were absolutely out of control at that time, and a lot of people lost their lives. And I think we owe it to our friends and families who lost people during that time to not gloss over it and not minimize it, not explain it away with numbers that were false. I think that's extremely important. And I think that trauma sort of informs directions that we've gone today. Number two, I think the MAHA movement, like I said, is a good idea. And if you said, Chris, okay, well, how would you go about the MAHA movement? Here's how I would go about it. I would set up a department. I think the USAID building is empty now, so we plenty of office space. And I would encourage doctors from all states, all different specialties to submit things that they see within their own lives and practices that could be improved upon. I'll give you an example. I diagnose you with sleep apnea. And you're like, wow, okay, yeah, well, my wife says I snore and I feel terrible during the day. I'm so tired. And you're telling me I have 78 breathing problems per hour. Okay, I'm all ears. What should we do? What we should do is get you on a CPAP. Now, there's surgeries and there are oral appliances, but studies have shown that generally CPAPs work best. Great. How much is a CPAP? If you go online right now type it in. Go to cpap.com or CPAP store or whatever, and just say, type in how much it is to get a ResMed S11. That's the newest ResMed model. I am not sponsored by ResMed. You're going to see probably about $800. That is not what we bill insurances for CPAPs. It's probably closer to about 2000. So you need a CPAP. We send you to a home health organization. They give you the CPAP. They bill your insurance for $2,000. Why does that home care company exist? Why can we not set up a situation where when I say you need a CPAP, I send you to cpap.com or someplace, ResMed, whatever. You buy the CPAP for about 800 bucks, keep the receipt, and you submit the receipt and maybe a letter from me stating that you need it, and this is your one CPAP. You submit it to your insurance, and they cut you a check for $800. How much is your insurance paying? They're paying $800 now instead of 2000. How much are you paying? It's still about the same. Like there's little things like this multiplied over populations that could be transformed. And I guarantee you, every doctor, every researcher, every scientist would tell you something. Hey, I'm a scientist. When I apply for a grant, I have to do X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't make any sense because of this, but it's the way it's always been. We can't get any kind of reform around it. I don't take insurances in my practice because it's just a losing proposition. Therefore, it changes the way we do. So there's lots of things going on here. So I mean, I have tons of ideas of how to make healthcare better, but nobody really listens about that. So I don't think going after doctors, vilifying doctors, and going after vaccines makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that drives me crazy, that's always in the comments and of any kind of post related to this is something about, well, it's just because doctors want to make a whole bunch of money giving vaccines. That is not how that works. I'm not arguing that somebody's making money on vaccines. For sure, somebody's making money. It is not doctors. And we'll come back to that a little bit in a minute. The other thing that was really frustrating to me was a declaration that America is the sickest country in the world, and that when RFK Jr. was young, there was no chronic disease. Now that he is, God knows how old he is, I'm not really sure. Chronic disease is everywhere. Chronic disease has always been everywhere. I'm certain numbers have gone up, but I think that when he was a kid, 2 out of 3 men died because of heart disease. I mean, chronic disease has always been here. We haven't been very good at recognizing it. I'm sure a lot of things back then did not have names that they do now. So this idea that we're the sickest country, no, we're not the sickest country. However, when you compare the United States to other developed countries, we do not do well. Now, a lot of that has to do with the disparity in healthcare and health access between the poorest Americans and the richest Americans. I did my medical training at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm going to tell you, growing up in Southwest Virginia, both my parents are school teachers, um, middle class. Do you know what I mean? Like probably upper middle class if you really you get into it. I didn't really necessarily feel like we were lacking in money. I got to go to the beach every year during, vacation because both my parents are school teachers. We were all off at the same time. You would go skiing sometimes when school was out. Like I didn't feel like I wanted anything. Like I felt like I was doing quite well. We had 2 cars, like so we were not poor. When I went to Emory and worked in downtown Atlanta and also worked in a family medicine practice, it was shocking to me. There was a saying at Grady, this hospital, when you get sick, you go to bed. If you really get sick, then I guess you see the doctor. And some of the things that I saw, the first question in my mind, it wasn't out of my mouth, but in my mind was, why are you just coming in now? you're going to lose your foot. Did you not see this thing developing on your body? Like it was really an eye-opening experience to me in the late 90s to see firsthand what that really looked like. And I think it's important for us to recognize this, that when we have this kind of population as a part of our healthcare system, it's always going to be very difficult if we're not doing more for them to create a situation where, as a population, we're competing with other developed countries. Now, take the top 10% of us, the people who listen to podcasts, to be honest with you. Do you know what I mean? Like the educated, the well employed, the people with health care and time to spend listening to some random doctor talk. Like take the top 10%. Oh, brother, we compete. We're way up there in terms of access. I mean, we've got amazing medical facilities here. So we have to be very careful about how we're talking about these things. And this idea that everybody was healthy back when TVs were black and white and had a horizontal and vertical hold. Remember that? And the little antenna and the little switch between Atari and like the people back then were great. And the people now are really sick is not particularly helpful. Now, speaking to that, I went to medical school from 95 to 99. And I distinctly remember on multiple occasions communications from the people who taught us that we were going to be the generation of preventative medicine. And it was really inspiring that we were going to prioritize keeping you healthy rather than fixing you when you were sick. And as I think about the MAHA movement, that promise has failed the public. We do not prioritize. Now, when I say we, I'm saying in general, the medical machine. Do doctors prioritize it? Yes, they do. Very much so. Are we aided by insurance powers and administrative powers to make that so? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Did you all watch The Pit? There was a great scene in The Pit. This is on HBO Max, ER, where somebody comes in and the ER doctor's getting reamed out by the administrator saying, you've got to like bill for higher codes and you've got to do this and this and this. It has nothing to do with medical care. It's when you come in and your belly hurts, they need to like say, well, we considered appendectomy, we considered pregnancy, we considered GI distress and gastritis. Like the more things you consider, the more we make money. Now, sitting down and like counseling and that doesn't do anything. Colonoscopies, to me are the one preventative thing that seems to make sense financially. Everything else doesn't. So what happens is we incentivize the things that make money and we don't the things that don't. So if you're not going to pay for preventative medicine, it's not going to happen. We already don't make enough money as it is. We're scrambling, scrambling. The amount of people, we did this whole thing about doctors. The amount of doctors living paycheck to paycheck is shocking. Newsflash, my clinic, the clinic where I actually see patients as a medical doctor, does not make that much money. It just doesn't. It doesn't. So if you're somebody who relies on that clinic to pay your mortgage and pay your family's grocery bills and stuff like that, it can be a real struggle. And we need help. It's not the doctors, it's the system needs to help us make preventative care a reality. Vaccines. Look, vaccines are a public health cornerstone. There's a great Neil deGrasse Tyson video that says, from the dawn of man up until about the late 1800, like your life expectancy was 30. Half of people died by the time they got to 35. So 50-50 shot, you're making it to 35. And then suddenly, and you can see it. I mean, this is known stuff. You probably studied in college. Suddenly, expectancy soared. Why? Science, vaccines, antibiotics, figuring out, hey, maybe washing your hands is a good idea. Just science matters. It's a good thing. It's not always a good thing. In general, it's a good thing. Occam's razor, right? The most logical explanation is probably the right one. So I do think that there were problems in terms of the vaccines being rushed, but it was really more about rush to find funding and ways to create it, not cutting corners. The mRNA, vaccine, that technology existed. Again, this was an amazing feat that happened, getting all these vaccines together in such a short period of time. To me, it kind of almost feels like sort of a fog of war. So that's the number six thing that I would say about, the vaccines is we didn't know because we didn't know at the time. We were really kind of learning as we went along. So it is I mean, and should we debrief the situation? Should we retrospectively look back on it and learn? Yes, we absolutely should. And we are learning that corners were cut, messaging was terrible, messaging was inconsistent. But, I kind of think of COVID like being a war, that there were things that were just unavoidable. And my hope is that with reflection on what happened here and thoughtfulness, we will do better during the next pandemic. And will there be another pandemic? Yeah, there'll be another pandemic. So it's a little concerning to me when I hear funding being cut for, preparedness. We're cutting vaccine research. We're doing all this stuff. Why? I don't quite understand how that's helping anyone. No, I think we should look back on what was done and identify problems. We make mistakes. Doctors make mistakes. Scientists make mistakes. But there is a difference between a mistake and we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of data. Our best guess is X. Let's go. It's almost like the Samaritan laws, right? That you can't be sued if you try to save somebody's life, but it goes sideways. I mean, I tried. Well, you did it wrong, or whatever. I don't know. Like, so to me, it's kind of like that. Like there was the maliciousness I don't really see. Anyway, side effects and perception. I will say this. All drugs have side effects. All drugs have ingredients and side effects and unforeseen consequences, both before they come to market and after marketing. Vaccines were studied, drugs were studied. We know the vaccine risk of these types of things. Were they minimized? Yeah, I think they were. And I don't think that was a great idea. As a provider, I don't like to minimize anything. I like to maximize and then have a patient come back and say, man, you were really worried about X. I didn't have any trouble with X. In my back of my mind, well, great. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, yeah, because X is pretty rare, but I just wanted to prepare you for it versus, oh yeah, you just do this drug. It's easy. There's no problem with that. You're not gonna have any trouble with that. That as soon as you say I'm not gonna have any trouble with that, you're gonna have trouble with it, right? So we want to be clear about dangers. And I think we weren't in a lot of situations, but just keep in mind the sheer numbers of this vaccine. The rollout was unreal. 95% of elderly people, billions of vaccine doses out there. So you can really start to do the math there very quickly. Just pick one, myocarditis, that inflammation of the heart that people were worried about, real side effect, happened in about 1 in 50,000 vaccines. But if you're giving it out to a large number, I mean, that's what, 14,000 cases of vaccine related myocarditis in the United States. 14,000 blood clots. Something like 1 in a million. Okay, here we go. That's 7,000 cases of blood clots. So we got 14,000 myocarditis, 7,000 blood clots. We're already at 20,000 side effects. And I've just picked two. 20,000. 20,000. That's a lot of people. What about fatigue? So a lot of people said, I don't, have you ever sat with a family or a parent of a side? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Both of long-term COVID, which we saw a lot of, and I've talked to a lot of people who were healthy, had the vaccine, and developed neuropathy, fatigue, sleepiness. That's who's generally going to come to see me, some sort of neurological or, sleep-related thing. I did see it, and I believe it. Healthy person, field hockey, da, 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 and they did this, and now they've got this burning, tingling in their feet. Sure. Could it have been something else that was just temporally related? Yeah, sure. But if you're asking me, what do you think happened? I think it was related to the vaccine. People are going to have problems with the vaccine. And now we get into sort of personal choice and personal freedom and how that weighs against the collective. And I don't really want to get into that because that to me is a personal choice. Like, you know, but it will get to something that I'll talk about in just one second. Number eight, I did my own research. I think we have to be very careful with this. Hey, Chris, I'm going to disagree because I've done my own research and but you haven't. I haven't either. Some scientist did the research and came up with some findings. You found that study and used that to support your position. That was your research. It was really more like you've created a bibliography. I'm going to write a paper about Civil War economy. So I need to go back and you didn't do the research. You're looking at other people's research. And that's important because number one, it takes a lot of training and practice to be able to properly evaluate research. Number two, there is good research and bad research out there, and we have to understand when one is well outnumbering the other. I think that becomes really important. So, when I think about like vaccines and autism, this was the 1998 Lancet study that started it all, right? This is where were you when it happened? And when that study came out, it caused a lot of problems. And when people went back, they said, well, wait a minute. Number one, this study involved 12 children. 12 children. Now, if I said I have a penny and I flipped it and it landed heads 60% of the time, 70% of the time, the first question becomes, how many flips did you do? Because if I flip a coin 5 times and it comes up heads 5 times, that's pretty interesting. It's not a miracle, and it doesn't prove that there's anything magical about the penny. Flip it 500 times and it lands heads 500. Now we're talking. Now we're reaching a point of statistical significance. What was chance and what was real? What was real? This study was not a proper trial. It never contained a control group. It relied on parent reporting. It's like asking, my patients in a study to report, how much did you sleep last night? Well, for the past 6 months, I've slept 1 hour. That's what they reported. It's not physically possible, but that's what they reported. So reporting can be problematic. The procedures were misjust. It was just a failed study. Not to mention, if you listen to this podcast and I tell you when you read a research study, what's the first thing you read? You get out of the end of the study and figure out where the funding came from. Where did that Lancet Wakefield study came from? It came from, it was paid for by lawyers who were suing vaccine makers and a rival measles vaccine. That's who funded the study. And again, there's nothing wrong with him funding that study. You can fund whatever you want to, but we have to take that in consideration in terms of a conflict of interest and a bias in that research. So, what's come out since then? There have not been any studies linking vaccines to autism that have scientific merit. There was a nationwide Danish study of 650,000 children, no increased autism after the MMR. New England Journal cohort out of Denmark showed strong evidence against MMR causing autism. JAMA study, sibling study, 95,000 patients, no link, even older sibling autism was included. National Academy of Medicine reviews 2024 updated CDC page rejects a causal relationship between MMR and thimerosal, which is a preservative that is put in the vaccines that you've probably heard about. This is allowing a rural clinic to stock a vaccine because without it, the shelf life is very short and they would not be able to afford it. And either way, there's no link to autism. Meta-analysis of vaccine 2014 pooled 1.25 million children, no association between thimerosal, MMR, and autism. And finally, a journal pediatric study of 2013 showed more or earlier vaccines not related to autism. Again, Occam's razor. If the obvious answer is usually the right one, 1,000 people, 10,000 people saw the robbery and the robber ran out wearing a red baseball cap, white t-shirt, and blue jeans and appeared to be an adult, not a child. But one person saw a blue hat, white t-shirt, and blue jeans and thought it was a kid. What do you think? Could it be a kid? Sure. Could it be a blue hat? Sure. 10,000 people saw a red hat. This is where we come to. So, sure, I can find all kinds of one-off studies that poke at this and poke at that. But in order for us to move forward as a society, we tend to we want to question. We want to look for reproducibility in science. But at some point, 7 times 5 is 35. And a plant cell uses carbon dioxide and sunlight and chlorophyll to make sugar and oxygen. It's just settled science. Over and over and over again, we can prove this. I proved it in biology lab when I was in college. Like maybe we can find somebody out there that doesn't think that's the case, but it's the case. So let's I think we have better things to do and bigger things to go after than that one lone voice and trying to and elevating that one lone voice against the 10,000 to a position where they're making decisions, I think is a really scary place for science to be in. Two more. Number one, shaming and division. Looking back, I've heard a lot about the policies of the past, and there was a lot of shaming that went on, and I think that that was wrong. And something I think that we all kind of felt a part of. It was like this sort of mass, you don't have a mask. Who are you? What are you doing? So I think that one of the lessons going forward is we need to govern with science and not shame. And trying to build coalitions positively, not through shaming and guilt. And I think that created a tremendous amount of collateral damage. I think the reason why we're in a position to have this podcast tonight has a lot to do with that shaming. And the final thing I just want to mention and say, number 10, science is a process. It's never dogma. And questioning is always healthy. Question as much as you like about this podcast. Make it better. I'll give you that voice if if it makes some degree of sense. And I think that my biggest disappointment with listening to that trial and a lot of the comments was it's moved away from I want dyes out of cereal. I want my kids not to have computers in school. I want content limited. I want more phys ed and exercise and more emphasis on healthy eating or whatever it is. And moved away from doctors can't be trusted. They're all bought and they're all making money and money all the way to the bank based upon these values. I mean, doctors want to help. I think in general, police want to help, and firefighters want to help, and your accountant wants to help, and your pilot wants to fly you safely to your destination. They know what they're doing. And your dentist wants to help. We go after doctors. I never hear like dentists getting lumped in there. Dentists, they're all in vaccines, back pocket. They're making money on all these fillings, and we don't need fillings. Our forefathers didn't have fillings. They just pulled their teeth out and replaced them with pieces of wood, and we're doing just fine. So it is interesting, like when you put the crosshairs on a certain organization, and I think that's how you build power on both sides of the aisle. You've got to create a villain. And what I would encourage you listening to this podcast is don't make your doctor villain. Question your doctor. I want you to feel aligned with your doctor. I want that number of people who feel that they can trust their doctors to grow even higher. Um, so anyway, that's it. Comments, corrections, criticisms. How can we make MASA a movement? Make America sleep again, right? DRCSplinter Instagram, DRCSplinter Twitter, uh, Blue Sky Threads. Our YouTube page is up and running. You can post some comments on there. Uh, I appreciate you giving this thought. I appreciate that there's such a groundswell of people who want to improve the health of themselves, their families, friends, and fellow Americans. That's really a positive thing we can get behind. I just think that we need to make that positive thing that we can get behind something that's rooted in science and rooted in real ways that help us and not help politicians. That's it. Until next week, sleep well.